Hey guys, Alex here again, and I got some more 3D models. And I want to talk about converting the heliocentric model to a geocentric plane. So in this model, we have the sun in a 24-hour period. I know I've already made a video about this, but I want to just go ahead and touch on the heliocentric model for a second and get used to some terminology. So in the heliocentric model, the round Earth goes around the sun, tilted on an axis of 23.4 degrees in an elliptical orbit, which means that it's off-centered. So sometimes the Earth will be closer, and sometimes the Earth will be further. And this tilt coupled with these apsides, is what they're called, further and closer, creates the seasons. Now I'm going to show how that converts to a geocentric plane, but first let's get familiar with this. So in the heliocentric model, in June the Earth is furthest from the Sun, called aphelion, and in December the Earth is closest to the Sun, called perihelion. Now in June it's summer in the northern hemisphere and winter in the southern hemisphere. And you would think it's further from the sun, so it would be winter in the northern, but it's actually winter in the southern. And the reason for that is because the Earth is, in this model, tilted on its axis 23.4 degrees toward the sun, tilted toward the sun, whoops, and its tropics, which are these three lines right here, face downward. So sunlight hits the northern tropic of Cancer, lighting up the northern hemisphere, giving it summer in the northern hemisphere and winter in the southern hemisphere. So that's during June, when it's furthest from the sun, aphelion. Now in December, it's closer to the sun. Now this is not to scale; it's dramatic. So it paints a better picture. In December, the North Pole is facing away from the sun, and the southern tropic of Capricorn receives the sunlight, so it's summer in the southern tropic and winter in the northern tropic. So this is how the heliocentric model describes the seasons. Now, apsides are aphelion far, perihelion close with regards to Earth and the Sun. But with regards to the moon and the Earth, when the moon is further, it's called apogee. And when the moon is closer, it's called perigee. Now, the moon gets further and closer. It completes its elliptical orbit. That's also an elliptical orbit once every 28 days. So every 14 days, it's perigee, and then the next 14 days, it's apogee, perigee, apogee. Whereas with the sun, every 6 months, it's aphelion in June, and every 6 months, it's perihelion in December. And that stays the same. Every June, it's aphelion. Every December, it's perihelion. Whereas with the moon, it could be the beginning of the month, it's perigee, and the end of the month, it's apogee. But a few months later, the beginning of the month, it's perigee, or opposite. And so the moon getting closer and further changes with apogee and perigee. Its apsides changes, but the sun, with regards to the distance of the Earth, remains relatively the same throughout the year. Furthest in June, closest in December, and that's how the seasons are created. So this is the heliocentric model's explanation of seasons. And now what I'm going to do is convert that to a geocentric plane. Geocentric just means everything goes around us, and planispheric means you take the sphere, convert it to a planisphere, and convert it to a plane. So in this planisphere, we have the exact same thing. The sun is simply closer to the Earth plane in December, which is perihelion. It's the same as here, perihelion. And it's furthest in June, which is aphelion. And so in this model, I'm showing, and I've already made a video on this, but I'll describe it in more detail. The sun, each sun is representing one day, a 24-hour day, in its respective month. And so in June, it's a tight, small circle, highest in altitude, or aphelion. And in December, it's a wide, fast circle, lowest in altitude, or perihelion. And if you notice here, each hour the sun has to cover an hour of time zone. And so in the smaller circle in June, in the highest altitude, it's moving a lot slower than in the lowest altitude in the widest circle in December because it has to cover more ground. And so as it's covering just this small chunk of ground, it's moving a lot slower, whereas over here it has to move a lot faster to cover that same chunk of ground. Okay, so here is how the sun acts throughout the entire year. Now, throughout the year in the heliocentric model, it goes around its elliptical orbit, slowly getting further, and 6 months later getting closer, and 6 months later getting further, and 6 months later getting closer. And its tilt, and the way it's tilted, describes how much light hits what tropic. And so when we convert that to a geocentric plane, what would have to happen throughout the year is, now this sun is going to represent about a month with every movement. So what's going to happen is it's going to spiral out and lower and wider and faster, and then come back inward and higher and tighter to complete the year. And so the reason it does this, is because it has to go lower in altitude to reach the Tropic of Capricorn and higher in altitude to reach the Tropic of Cancer in the northern hemisphere, or hemicircle in this geocentric plane. And so that creates the seasons. So while the geocentric model uses an elliptical orbit and the tilt, the geocentric plane simply has the sun rising higher and lower in altitude and getting tighter and wider over the tropics of Cancer and Tropic of Capricorn. And now it's been said that I believe Broccoli, I think is his name, that as the sun comes higher and lower, it actually creates a vortex. And so this is some interesting stuff to look at. That if it is doing this kind of movement, it would be creating some kind of vortex. And so that'd be something interesting to look into. I have a 14-day lunar cycle of the sun and moon. And let me get that back to the first scene. There we go. A lunar cycle of the sun and moon and a full 14 days. And so this was almost 400 frames, so I wasn't able to do the full 28-day cycle, but this is what it would look like with the sun and moon and the moon's phases over a 14-day period. So when the sun and moon are when the moon's directly above the sun, or they're side by side together, you have a new moon. And in the heliocentric model, that just means the sun is behind the moon. And in the geocentric plane, according to Vedic cosmology, the moon is higher than the sun. So I'll go ahead and start the animation. Now, they take off together, completing an hour every hour in time zone. Now, as it passes midnight, the moon slowly lags behind, creating a young moon. And right here I show the sun and moon getting further and further apart, creating the phases of the moon. Now, every time the sun completes a full 24-hour solar day or passes the midnight mark here, the moon slowly lags behind further and further, and you get another phase of the moon. And so from below, to an observer below, if we look from down here in California, looking up, you would see the sun rise and set and the moon rise and set behind it during the crescent phases. And so when you look up in the sky and you see blue sky with the little nail of the moon on a crescent phase, this is how that's described in a geocentric plane. And you see how the moon slowly lags further and further behind. And so as the moon lags further and further behind, you get a quarter moon when the sun and moon are 45 degrees apart. And so that's a quarter moon. And when they're 180 degrees apart, you get a full moon. And then the 14-day cycle mirrors itself and catches back up in the waning phases. These are the waxing phases. So here are the waxing phases as the moon slowly fills up with light, lagging behind the sun. And then after the quarter phase, you start getting gibbous phases. And it's just the sun completing its 24-hour cycle, and every day as it passes midnight, the moon slowly lags behind it. Now, the way I'm doing it is a dramatic lag right when it passes midnight, but in reality, it's a very fluid motion. And in reality, they're not full 28-day cycles, and so sometimes the cycle changes. It's very bizarre. Ancient maps use lunar calendars instead of solar calendars, and so as soon as the sun passes midnight again, you'll see that they're 180 degrees apart, and you have a full moon. So the moon is completely lit and visible to an observer down below. So that's a 14-day lunar cycle, and it would catch as soon as it passes midnight again. It slowly lags behind until it catches back up with the sun and starts over in another new moon. We have the precession of the equinoxes, and what that basically means is precession is to move backwards or to proceed backwards, and the equinoxes, more specifically, is the vernal equinox, or March 21st. Sometimes that's March 20th. Now, if you were to look at the sunrise every day on March 21st and see what constellation it's behind, you'd be looking at the precession of the equinox, because every year it would slowly lag behind a few arc minutes. Whereas every 2160 years, it lags all the way back to a different constellation, one of 12 in the Vedic or astrology constellations or horoscope constellations. And so in this model that I made, I'm showing 2160 year cycles of precession. So what that means is right now we are about to enter the age of Aquarius, and so we're in Pisces, but we're towards the end of Aquarius. So in this model, it's kind of hard to comprehend what's going on here, but it's basically making a 12-point star from touching every single constellation. So as it completes its full circle, that's 25,920 year precession of the equinox cycle. And so as it moves up and down, that's 1,080 years, 1,080 years, 1,080 years. And so as it comes down and up, that's 2,160 years, or 30 degrees of precession as it moves backwards through the 12 constellations in the sky. Now, modern science and the heliocentric model will tell you that the Polaris star is moving, and that this precession of the equinox will move the entire constellations in the northern circumpolar constellations. But we don't have any proof of that happening, and it's just speculation at this point. So here's a little model that I made showing the precession of the equinox over a 25,920 year cycle, moving backwards every 2,160 years. So that's my model, showing the heliocentric model converted to a geocentric plane. Hey guys, Alex here, and I made a 3D model using Google SketchUp of the lunar cycles, a 28-day cycle of the sun and moon, traversing the flat earth plane using Gleason's 1892 New Standard Map of the World, because it's my favorite azimuthal equidistant projection. Now, I have the North Pole down here, I have Polaris up here, and I have the sun and moon here. Now, the moon is higher in altitude because in Vedic cosmology it contends that the moon is higher in altitude, and I'm completely obsessed with ancient Vedic cosmology. Also, when I first saw this Gleason's 1892 azimuthal equidistant projection, I didn't really understand what these stars meant. It wasn't until I made this model and aligned Polaris with that top star that it began to make a lot more sense that it's directly above, kind of like the Dakota map. And so here is the 28-day cycle as seen from above. Now this is over the equator, so it would be during the equinox. And they're off. So this would be a young moon, and as the sun passes 6 p.m., you have I'm sorry, 6 a.m., you have a waxing crescent. As the sun passes noon, you have a waxing quarter. As the sun passes 6 p.m., you have a waxing gibbous. And when the sun hits midnight and the moon hits noon, you have a full moon, as they're 180 degrees apart. And that completes the waxing phases, and that's the 14th day. And now we'll begin the waning phases, which is another 14 days. So as the sun passes 6 a.m., you have a waning crescent, and as the sun passes noon, you have a waning quarter, and when the sun passes 6 p.m., you have a waning gibbous, and the sun catches back up at midnight, and you have another new moon. So this is my 28-day cycle of the moon. Let's get another angle here. So you can see how the sun and moon traverse the flat earth plane according to Vedic cosmology. And of course, the sun lights up half the plane at any given moment. And so when I was making this, I also wanted to show that if you do have these celestial bodies orbiting above an Earth plane, then they must be doing it. That there must be something that's allowing it to happen. They can't just magically be floating up there. And so when you watch acoustic propulsion, acoustic levitation, resonant levitation, magnetic levitation, you begin to wonder, like, perhaps this is how it's happening. Now we know that our ancient universe is completely electromagnetic, and gravity is a misrepresentation of electromagnetism and density. So perhaps and we know that the geographic North Pole is the magnetic South Pole, because the positive face of all compasses point north, and positive is attracted to negative, so there must be negative due north anywhere you are on the Earth. So the geographic North Pole is a magnetic South Pole. I've made a post about that before. And so what if the Polaris star is the magnetic North Pole, or the positive magnetic pole? And so the North Star would be the positive magnetic pole, and the North Pole, geographic North Pole, would be the negative magnetic pole, or the South magnetic pole. And between them, you have a magnetic field in which these celestial bodies can magnetically levitate. And so that was something I was thinking about, and I'm sure other people have thought the same thing. But it would be interesting to see if we could prove that somehow, if there could be some kind of proof, because we know that you can magnetically levitate objects between magnetic poles in a magnetic field, so this must be how that's happening. And also, while I'm here, I might as well show you the model with the planets that I made. Now this is a different one, but it's pretty cool because I was able to whoops. Oh. Oh. There we go. I was able to put in all the planets, and so we can check out the planets here. And of course, I'm obsessed with Vedic cosmology, so I threw in Rahu and Ketu. And so, yeah, this is how I believe that works. And of course, you have the summer orbit along Cancer, and then equinoxes orbits along the equator, and the winter orbit along Capricorn. Anyway, so I hope this helps paint a better picture in your head as to how these things work and how this model works of a planispheric, geocentric, cosmological model. Hey guys, Alex here again, and I'm making another video using Google SketchUp because it turns out on the last video I made showing the 28-day lunar cycle of the moon and sun together traversing the flat earth map using Gleason's 1982 New Standard Map of the World, some people were confused and didn't realize it was a 28-day cycle. I thought it was a 24-hour cycle. So this is the 24-hour cycle of just the sun. Now I didn't add the moon here because the moon stays right next to the sun on the first 24 hours, and then on the second day they complete a circuit together and it's slightly further apart. And on the third day they complete a third circuit and it's slightly further, even more further apart. And on the fourth day, a little further apart. Fifth day, a little further apart. Until the 14th day, where they're 180 degrees apart. Now, that's what I was trying to depict in the last video, the 28-day cycle, showing that the full moon was a 14-day cycle. So this right here, what I'm going to show you, is just the, this is the same thing, only this one is actually during summer, because the last one, the sun was over the equator during either autumn or vernal equinox, and this one is over the Tropic of Cancer in the northern tropic, about the 23rd degree parallel north, and it represents the sun in summer. Now, one thing that I haven't mentioned before is that I believe that during summer the sun the sun acts like a I'm sorry, throughout the year the sun acts like a top winding down. So during summer it's a tight, slow circuit, whereas during the equinoxes, it's a wider, lower, faster circuit, and during winter, it's very low, very fast, and very wide. So it would be like a winding top, starting off, slow and tight in summer, a little wider and faster and lower during the equinoxes, and then real wide, real fast, real low during winter, and then a little tighter, a little higher, a little slower during the next equinox, and then back to summer, tight, high, uh, slower. And the reason it gets faster and slower is because each one of these represent an hour in a time zone. And so for the United States, you'd have Pacific time, Mountain time, Central Standard Time, which is my time zone. Um, I believe this is Eastern time, I got those two confused, but anyway, you have negative, 8, 7, 6, 5, and 4. And so I believe that's how that works. But these are the time zones, and Gleason was kind enough to add them in there for us. That's why it's one of my favorite azimuth equidistant projection. So anyway, on with the animation. So this is a daily circuit. Now it's basically just the same day over and over, because if it was completing a day, it would be slowly getting lower, faster, and wider. And so the reason for that is because at the speed it's going here, this is traversing every time zone in exactly 1 hour. Now look what the time zone looks like out here. Look what 1 hour looks like out here over the Tropic of Capricorn in the 23rd degree south parallel. It's actually a lot wider than the 23 degree north parallel over the Tropic of Cancer. And so it would have to be a lot faster to cover that much ground in 1 hour. And so that's why I believe. And then of course in Vedic cosmology, it states that the sun is higher in altitude closer to the center and lower in altitude further out. So that's why I've made my model like this. Now I plan on making a video that actually shows it winding down like a top. That's going to take some time. So for now, here is the sun during summer, and we'll bring Polaris and line her up real good now. Just kidding. Where are you at, man? There you are, bruh. Oh Christ. What have I done? There you go. And so that's the sun in one day during summer. So I hope this kind of cleared some stuff up. And again, the moon would be right next to it. During a new moon, it would complete a circuit side by side, and then on the second day it'd be a little lagging behind it, the third day lagging a little further, fourth day lagging a little further, until the 14th day when it's lagging so far behind that they're 180 degrees apart. And then for the next 14 days the sun slowly catches back up with the moon. So on the last video it was a 28-day cycle. This is a 24-hour cycle. So yeah, that's my 5-minute video on the summer solstice motions of the sun over the flat earth plane. Hey, what's up guys? Alex here again with another 3D model using Google SketchUp. And today I'm going to be talking about the sun's movement during the seasons. And so I've made this nice little 3D model using Gleason's 1892 New Standard Map of the World. And so, as always, according to Vedic cosmology, I have the sun highest in altitude during summer, lowest in altitude during winter. And then, of course, as we know, the sun is over the Tropic of Capricorn in the 23rd degree north parallel during summer, and over the equator during equinox, and the 23rd degree south parallel during winter over the Tropic of Capricorn. And as always, Polaris up here and the North Pole down here are magnetic north and magnetic south, with our magnetic objects magnetically levitating in their orbit respectively. And so let's go ahead and get on with this animation. Alright, so as you can see, the summer sun, I'm sorry I couldn't get this to move with it. I don't know why I couldn't, but the summer sun moves a lot slower than the winter sun. And the reason for that is because I mentioned this in the last video of how much ground it has to cover. And so, oh, I gotta pause this. I learned that I need to pause this in order to get it. There we go. And so the sun moves. Maybe I can get these. Oh, there we go. And so the sun moves a lot faster during winter and slightly faster during the equinoxes because of how much ground it has to cover. And as you can see here plainly, in order for the sun to traverse an entire that much landmass in 1 hour, it would have to be moving substantially faster than in summer. And so yeah, this is my little 3D model that I made. Wasn't going to make a full 5-minute video, just wanted to make a quick little 2.5-minute video so you guys could see how this looks. Now these are all individual days. This doesn't represent a week or a month or a year. It just represents how they look individually in each 24-hour day. Now in reality, if we were making a full year here, which I'm going to try to do, we would have it winding down and slowly moving lower and wider and faster, and then back up tighter and slower and higher. And so, yeah, that's my little 3D model. Hope you guys liked it. Have a good day.